Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karma Uta Vardani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karma Uta Vardani Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karma Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karma Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karma Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karma Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Om Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karma Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karma Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Hum Om Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Sane Karma Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Pakyuke Kudan Dagi Lu Pakyuke Sundan Dagi Nga Pakyuke Tukdan Dagi Yin Tenyerme Chiktu Chingi Lu Makyuke Kudan Dagi Lu Makyuke Sundan Dagi Makyuke Tukdan Dagi Yin Tenyerme Chiktu Chingi Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Shakya Muni Swaha Sashipu Ki Choshi Meto Tramare Rabaling Shin Nidegem Padi Sange Shintu Mikte Uluwarki Drokununam Dashing Chopar Shoyidam Guru Ratna Mindrala Kam Niryatayami Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsu Che Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Druparasho Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsu Che Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Drupar Shoa Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Jancho Pardo Dani Kyapsu Chi Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Drupar Shoa.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge into enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Namo yal haye ke da ludan chin ke drubunda da mi ke nam dan drwa kun ke danam chit sampa tham che ke to da gi cheten. Buongiorno.
Good morning.
Nel mio percorso di chiedermi
Along my path of asking myself what a religion is, very often when people have asked me if Buddhism is a monotheistic religion, a polytheistic religion, I try to explain that it is neither. Is it a religion? Is it not a religion? There are those who say it's a life philosophy, or some say it's a religion. And here we have a problem at the basis. We ask we ask questions without knowing what we're talking about. In the sense, to ask such a question, well, we need to define what a religion is and what a life philosophy is. If I say a religion needs to be monotheistic or polytheistic, I would say that it's not a religion. Once in a book of Tibetan medicine, it was written that Buddhism is a psychological religion, and I thought, why not? It seemed more coherent. But in my view, a religion is the union of three things, and this goes beyond the religions that are formally recognized as such, but they're systems of credence that are made of three things, of belief. There's a part of a worldview, and the worldview is where we answer fundamental questions. What is life? Why do I suffer? What is happiness? How can I be? What do I need to do to be happy? What can I do to avoid suffering? What's death? What happens after death? Why does this happen like this and not like that? These fundamental questions. Who am I, for example? So these fundamental questions are part of a worldview where a certain explanation is given to reality, and that's where we develop this view. And on the basis of this view, the second part of a religion would be conduct, behavior, those rules that are applied, where we say, to be coherent with the view, you should do this and avoid that. And here comes out, how we should live our everyday life to be in sync with the view. That's the second part. And the third part would be the techniques of transformation, of familiarization, meditation, or we could translate it better as familiarization. These techniques of familiarization, tools that are applied to help us be in sync with our conduct, and that match also the view. There are many, many different methods. Can be meditation, sacred art, study, etc. So for me, the union of these three things is what we would call a religion, in my point of view. And so it's really important for us. What is the worldview, the rules of conduct, and what are the tools that I can apply? A great error that we make, a classic error in every religious context, is we don't realize that there's a view, that there are rules of conduct, and then there are techniques of familiarization. And what becomes important to us is belonging to a religion or another. And this comes also in scientific realms. I'm part of something, and that is worth more than what I'm actually doing. So it becomes more important to be a Buddhist than practice Buddhist teachings. I don't know if that distinction is clear. And so for the part of the view, it's the first step that we need to deepen. And what's interesting is that whether we're aware of it or not, we already have a view. We already have our own rules of conduct and tools that we apply to help us reach our objectives, because within our view we have these fundamental questions that we ask and that we give answers to. Among these are: why do I suffer? What can I do to avoid suffering? Where do I project my happiness, and what do I do to be happy? This we already do. We have a view, and based on this we try to be as coherent as possible. So if I project my happiness in having more money because I think my suffering is because my partner or my son, my daughter, my father, my mother needs to act in a certain way, I will try to obtain more money and get closer to one, get further away from another, because that's coherent with my view of what brings me happiness. And the question that Lama Tsongkhapa asks us really is based on these three aspects: view, conduct, and meditation. Let's remember that the meditation is a translation of the Tibetan word gom, which literally means familiarization. And we have a lot to see, so I don't want to go on too long, but I just want to touch on that it's important for each one of us along our path to allow ourselves to observe, reflect on the view that we are living today, not the view that I think I'm part of. I call myself a Buddhist, so I should think like this. No, really, for yourself, for what you think suffering is. Where is your happiness? Like in our everyday suffering, for example, do we see the suffering of change as suffering? In our view, when the seesaw is up, do we see that as a part of suffering? Normally, we don't. Are we able to see all pervasive suffering in our everyday life? It doesn't exist at all. It's not suffering or non-suffering, because in our ordinary view, we live our emotional states of being as a consequence of what we're living. We're victims. This is the most normal way. There's this citation of Buddha, Dani Dani Dai, I am, etc. I am my own protector. I am my own enemy. In our ordinary way, I'm not my own protector and I'm not my own enemy. Or rather, my suffering depends on others and my happiness depends on others as well. When I say others, I mean everything around me. If I suffer, it's because someone is not doing what they should do and things are not going the way they should go. Because if everything went the way if everything went the way it should go and everyone did what they should be doing, I'd be happy. And so I'm the victim of the world. This is the view, unfortunately, in which we live in. Buddha transmits a different view, or the first steps of this view is explained by I am my own protector, I am my own enemy, where my happiness depends mostly because this situations, what other people do in the other conditions, they influence me, but they're not the causes. And I don't want to go on too long about this, but it's important for us to observe where we are and where we want to go. When we start understanding that really I am my own protector, I am my own enemy, the deeper way to see that, we can see that we exist exclusively in a union of relations. We don't exist as we appear in a solid and independent way, and our being, the equation of this present moment, the result of this present moment that we experience is nothing other than the fruit of all of the other variables, the additions and the multiplications and the subtractions. And if we change those variables, the result changes. Is this clear? If we take an equation, for example, and we change the parts of the equation, will the result remain the same? Of course, no. It can happen that we change some variables and the result stays the same, but normally we change the parts and the result is different. In this present moment is nothing other than the result of a very complex equation made of thoughts and feelings and sensations, interactions, choices, made up of our five senses, the choices in the past, and everything of that present moment. But what's so interesting is that you can just change one of these variables and the result changes. And it's important for us to understand this dynamic well, to understand how it works, what brings us suffering. Because if it depended on me, I mean, if my happiness depends on me, then I really need to understand that that dynamic, I'm doing something that's not working. I need to see how it all works. So the question yesterday brought us to reflect on the fact that the fundamental cause of suffering is this all-pervasive suffering. The next questions deepen to understand what this samsara is and how it works. Yesterday, I made a new translation of the text. No, I didn't do it. I had a new translation done. It's something that's it's wonderful on one side, but it also perplexes me a little bit too. Today, the artificial intelligence is making translations that are better than the translations done actually by actual translators from Tibetan into English and Italian. but that here Lama Tsongkhapa is using a language register that's different compared to other of his texts. Other texts that he's written, he used a very formal, a scholarly language register, and this text is actually quite colloquial. So, so maybe the translator was trying to make it more scholarly, and yet it's very colloquial. So here I have a preliminary version. It needs to be corrected, but let's just look a little bit. But we'll read it. Let's just look at what we looked at. No, we're not going to go back to what we looked at. No, let's go right to today's question. We have so much ahead to look at. So here we are at the fourth question, question number 4, page 15.
Nalma onsa mechens, korwe ke onsa mechens, korwar kewe tsawani lujen kungi rangyo ki ngada ngayi war miknes, tokpe takza ma impas, tome druba zimbayi danzin lenge namnites, nyumun chingi marik paus teta gyawe yumle ke ngada ngayir zimbayi, lujen korwar korshe sung stongni dunju pale kyang, gyudan kenle kengonam yangda ni to tokpa kang te ni tembe mare son tele shendo chungni tele yanla chungni chungs shedarin chen tenwa le jise pungbor zin yo pa tesi tela ngar zin yo na yang le tes le kyang ni kewa yins shedan dawe shable kyang nyomon kena malyo pa jikzo tale chungshe songs danzi nigi mikpala kebar yogen zingdanda mi tu mechir sitsani ni su talve kyendan trals. Ho saltato la prima parte.
I jumped the first part.
Korwa dir kewara chebe gyu tso ngoshi tartupa rangshik ngo singobe te tabuni gyawe sombate kanyins dir charwang ngunzi masingna di jumbe nyempo kanyingdang jomlo jidar chebar chawar ngo mi simbar pöso tsamle miontes perna drango masine ma jemba shinos tenya marikpayin tenya timuyin tenya ngunzi yin sheso mawa wenkyans tenam gi kyang charwa rangwa masingna perna kuma kanying ngunzin chukpe tse miyin tenya tsumbayin tenya shombayin she chinye mekyans kansa chikla zumo tsukpa la kuma ngo misimba shinos tena rangyo la carnes tebe tse nga korwar kewe gyui tsowo rang tartupa di yimbar du nyambe nyongwa langwa gyumtse yangda la tenchi mwebe nesu masongwa chik tangbor ke goetes perna men tongwa la tambor ne ngwe she goebadan drawe sos. Ok. Vado direttamente alla traduzione.
So let me just give you this new translation that I've done. So the fourth question, question 4. First of all, we must identify the primary and definitive cause that makes us be reborn in this samsara. What is the cause as taught by the Buddha? That's clear, right? So Lama Tsongkhapa is asking, the first thing that we need is to have clarity. Okay, we've understood that we want to get out of samsara. We've seen this sickness. We've seen this state of the the polluted mind and body, polluted by mental defilements and karma. But if I'm not able to identify the primary cause of the sickness, I'll never be able to cure my sickness. So the first step is to see the sickness, and the second is to understand the causes, to then abandon the cause and apply the antidote. So the answer that Lama Tsongkhapa is asking is, we've understood what samsara is, but how does it work, and what's the primary cause? Where does it all begin? And he goes on. If we do not precisely identify this point, we will not be able to recognize either what the appropriate antidote is or how to apply it correctly. It would be like waging a war without identifying the enemy. Some might say it is ignorance or illusion or attachment to concrete existence. But these answers still do not identify the crucial point. It's like when trying to identify a thief, saying it's a person, it's a monk, it's a young person, is useless until you point your finger at a specific person. So, when we examine our mind, we must develop a vivid experience based on valid reasons, not just on assumptions or beliefs, that makes us recognize this is the primary and definitive cause that makes me be reborn in samsara. It's like a doctor who must firstly correctly identify the disease before being able to prescribe a cure. Okay? So, Lama Tsongkhapa says, we've understood that we're in samsara, but where does it all begin? What's the cause? And it's not enough to look at the cause in a generalized way. We need to point our finger specifically at the cause. Let's go to the answer, and then we will the Panchen Sancharigas answers in verse. The root of samsara is in the mental continuum of all embodied beings, the two innate forms of self-attachment, which fixating on the I and mine grasp them as existing intrinsically, not as mere conceptual designations. This is the afflicted ignorance. This is afflicted ignorance. Thus says the mother of the victorious ones, for attachment to the I and mine, beings wander in samsara. And in the 70 verses on emptiness, the Buddha called ignorance the conceiving as truly existent things arisen from causes and conditions. From this arise the 12 links. And in the precious garland, as long as there is attachment to the aggregates, there will be attachment to the self. With attachment to the self comes karma. From karma comes rebirth. And Chandrakirti said, all the faults of the afflictions arise from the view of the transitory collection. Although the two types of self-attachment have different objects, their way of grasping does not differ, so there is no fault of two roots of samsara. Let's explain this. Let me see where I should start so I can make it to simplify it a bit. Let's start where we are, which is the only choice we have. When we experience a sensation of pleasure or one of suffering, imagine what you want, better one of pleasure. Once we have that sensation, that feeling, what do we do? Are we neutral? Do we look for the reason? Do we project on our inner process something external? What do we do normally? In your opinion? When you feel any form of suffering or pleasure, what do you do? Do you point your finger at something or someone, or do you just stay in that state? We point our finger and we look for the reason. In looking for the reason, normally we project onto what's around us. We see a situation, we see an object, something that we're perceiving sensorially, and there can also be a mental object, a memory from the past, or a projection in the future. Something, it's just some kind of mental object that we deem the cause of that sensation. And if that sensation is pleasurable, I develop attraction that manifests in attachment or desire towards that thing. But if I recognize it as a cause of my suffering, I develop aversion to that, because at our basis, we don't want to suffer. We want to be happy, so we want to avoid that. And from aversion, resentment, anger, violence, aggressivity, that aggression, that comes from that feeling. And in this, there's something interesting. There's an interesting characteristic. Imagine an object of strong desire. Think about something that you really like. Imagine that you're in front of that object of desire. Observe our emotions and that feelings of enormous attraction and desire. That good thing is beautiful, it's good. Why? Without philosophizing, how do we live that experience? Because it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's good. It is like this. Or is it like that? Or because we attribute a value to it as we're living it? How do we live it? We're in front of an object of jealousy, of anger or envy, an object of fear. Imagine an object of anger. Someone who acts in a certain way, a particular situation, and when we're in front of that situation, that object of anger that should be annihilated, destroyed, I mean, do we attribute that value to that object, or is it something that's absolutely horrible and should be annihilated? Is it intrinsically? Is it an object of anger in an objective way, an autonomous way, or is it something that I attribute that value to? It must be objectively bad, because I don't want to suffer. If it were just up to me, I wouldn't suffer. So let's keep this aside and let's observe something. I play the singing bowl. Okay? Can you all hear? Yes? It's not a hard question. Now, if you were to ask the person next to you, did you hear the singing bowl? What do you think the person would say? They would say yes. Are you seeing me? If you ask the person next to you, can you see Lama? What is the answer? Yes. Okay, let me play this again. Imagine asking the person next to you, can you hear the singing bowl? Or that person asks us, if we hear the singing bowl? And our answer is yes. But now let's interpret the question a little bit more. Let's see what's between the lines. That's in the question, but it's not explicit. Even in the question, can you see Lama? In the two questions, there's something that's not explicit. When I ask you, can you hear the sound of the singing bowl? What I'm actually asking you is, can you hear the sound that I am hearing? Can you see the Lama that I am seeing? Is that clear? When we ask the other person, can you see this? Can you hear that? We're asking, can you see what I see? Can you hear what I'm hearing? Is that clear? Now let's philosophize a little bit. How does sound work? As I sound the singing bowl, I take the stick and I tap this so-called singing bowl made of 7 different types of metal. And then what happens? It generates a vibration in the air. And this vibration in the air comes to each one of you, and those who are at home goes through the microphone and comes out through your speakers. Those of you who are here physically, there's this vibration is in the air. The vibration starts, and then what happens? The vibration in the air, it expands, and it hits, reflects on other objects, so the walls and the ceiling, and comes to our hearing. What happens when it comes to our hearing? It moves those little the little hairs in our, or those sensors in our hearing. They're moved, and they send signals to our brain, where there's the hearing consciousness that says there is sound. And we do a kind of inner research, our inner database of all our previous experiences, that we ask ourselves, what sound is that? And based on our previous experiences, and then we put together also our visual experiences of the present moment. We say, this is the singing bowl that Lama has rung. So this experience has 3 essential points, and this is valid for all of our sensations. We have the sensory object, the vibrations in the air, called sound. We have a sense power, our hearing, and sense consciousness, the part of our mind that interprets the signals that come. So these 3 together is called regpa in Tibetan, contact. And on these 3, based on these 3, we can look at it in our inner database and say, and ask ourselves, what is this? And then we, based on our discernment, we can say, this is a sound of a singing bowl that Lama is playing, for example. When we attribute a name, it comes together with memories and emotions, many things. It's not just conceptual. It's a union of many things. And then this also activates a physiological reaction. So as I play the singing bowl, the sensory object that comes to my hearing, and the sensory object that comes to the hearing of others, or to lamas. So, I mean, it's all different. I mean, just look at our distance, our position where we are. It's similar, but ja na uwa mayin in Tibetan. So what is similar by definition is different. So our sensory object is different. Our sense power is that our hearing, the hearing of each one of us, is it all the same or is it the same? What about our sense consciousness? Is it the same or different? It's all different. What about our discernment, the value that we attribute to this object? It's different. So the sensory object is different. The sense power is different. The sense consciousness is different, and the value attributed to it is different. So, are you hearing what I am hearing? Are you hearing the sound that I am hearing? No. When we see someone, what happens? The light touches that object, that person, then reflects back to our eyes. So the sense object is the light, the sense power are in our eyeballs, and the sense, the visual consciousness, the contact. So from that contact, we are able to discern that it is this or that. So if I ask you, are you seeing the Lama that I'm seeing? No. So, and what's crazy is that no one has ever perceived anything that we have perceived. It's just quite shocking. Because we don't have a choice but to live and experience things through the filter of ourselves, through our body and our five senses. We live our reality through our mental sense power that connects to our own projections and our memories and all the experiences we've had. So what happens if I repeat the same sense, if I'm complete, if I take the same sensory object and experience it again and again and again, imagine if I just keep playing the same singing bowl again and again and again, would it stay pleasurable? Or it could happen we stay somewhere and we think it's beautiful, and then we go back, and then it's not as nice as we remember. At some point we like it, and then we don't like it anymore. Or for example, an example of this would be seeing a movie after many years. I don't know if this has ever happened to you. And I see the movie a second time. I said, "What happened? What happened? Did they change something?" I remember having cried and being emotional, feeling something in that film, and now nothing. What's happened? Did the director change something? Something very, very normal happened. It's called impermanent. The film is not the same because the experience, the film is made up of the experience, not just the images and the sounds that come to me. It's also made up of my sense powers and all the values that I attribute to those scenes. So what I see, actually, we can say, is a constant creation. What I'm seeing, when we see a painting or listen to a sound or watch a movie or whatever it is, we are creating the experience that we're living, because that experience doesn't depend on something objective. It's a subjective experience, not objective. So reality is subjective, where we're not able to experience anything independently from the observer, which is us, even ourselves. Are you following? So now, this reality, how does it appear to us without philosophizing? reality appears as being subjective, or does it appear as if it were objective? Am I seeing what I'm seeing, or am I seeing what is? Am I hearing what I hear, or am I hearing the sound that is there? And 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 if you say no, that sound is what I'm hearing is different, then that's your mistake. And so the way we live things, the way we live our life, what we perceive, is it what we perceive, or are we perceiving what is, what's there, in your opinion? Without philosophizing, how do we live our life? We're perceiving what is there. So, in other words, this subjective reality appears to us as being objective, and we relate to this subjective reality as if it were objective. An example that we read yesterday, when we imagine we go to the seaside or to the desert, and we walk and we see the horizon. The earth, does it seem flat or round? It appears as if it were flat. And how do we relate to that? As if it were absolutely flat, right? Because of the education we've received and the things we've learned, we know that the planet Earth is not flat. There are people who still believe that the Earth is flat. I've met people, and then I would say, what would imagine an eclipse with a flat Earth? But anyway, it's the strangest thing. When I talked to this person, the person said the reason is that the ancient texts say that the Earth is flat, and I've read texts of astronomy for Tibetan astrology, and one text with the very specific calculations, they have a minimum of something like from 1027, and they were already old at the time. I mean, this was an original text, was 1027, and was already very old. It had been translated, and in there I can assure you that the Earth was not flat. I learned how to make calculations to the second. There's a little, like a second of disparity when there's an eclipse, but I mean, these calculations come from 1027, already translated into Tibetan and based on even older texts, and the Earth was not flat. But where does this idea of the Earth being flat come from? For you, for me. Is the Earth flat or is it round? Conceptually, we know that it's round, but on an experiential level, how does it appear to us? It appears to us as being flat, and we relate to the Earth as if it were flat. But we know conceptually that it's not like that. Let me give you another example. An example that I think we've all experienced even this morning. We look at ourselves in the mirror. When we look at ourselves in the mirror, what do we see? Without philosophizing. These are not trick questions. I mean, what do we see when we look at ourselves in the mirror? Whose face? Our face. I look in the mirror and I see my face, right? You look in the mirror and you see your face, right? What happens if the mirror is a little yellow? How is my face? Is yellow, but is my face yellow? So am I seeing my face or am I not seeing my face? What am I actually seeing if we reflect on it? Where we see the reflection of my face, the light that comes, touches my face, it reflects on the mirror that then comes back to my eyes, right? So I'm not seeing my face. What I'm seeing in the mirror is nothing other than the reflection of the image of my face, right? And there's something very strange but true here. No one, none of us has ever seen our own face. Maybe you've seen the tip of the tip of your nose, maybe a little bit blurry. Think about that for a moment. That none of us has ever seen our own face. And imagine if your whole life you had always looked into a curved mirror. I mean, and you decide if it's curved horizontally or vertically, like those filters of the cell phone. What would happen if we always saw our reflection through a curved mirror? We could think that when we're like this, we're actually like this. And what's interesting with this example is that you don't need a degree in philosophy to understand that what we see in the mirror is not actually our face. We've understood that. But even if we understand this related to the mirror, what appears to us? Our face. And we relate to it as if it were our face, when instead our face is it's not. Let me give you another example. We're dreaming. And during our dream, something difficult or tiresome or bad happens. And what happens in the dream? There's a monster that falls following us. Do we say, oh, that was just a dream? Or do we react? We can feel afraid in the dream. We can try to run away. We can cry. There's suffering, anger, aversion. We react in our dream. Can someone help? So what happens in our dream, when we see something in our dream, it appears to us as being real or false. It appears as if it were really happening. So if I'm dreaming and at a certain point the person close to me dies in the dream, and then I wake up and I see that person next to me, is that person dead or alive? It's normally if you dream of someone dying, it's a sign of long life. But if we see something in a dream, it appears real when instead it's not. Another example, and then we'll stop with these examples. Let's imagine when we're watching a movie, for example, the very first movie that was made, it said the first movie shown to the public, like in a kind of cinema, was a scene of a train that was coming towards the audience. And what was the reaction of the people when they were in that room and they see this image of a train that comes towards them? They would get up, they would yell. We know that what's on the screen are dots of light, or do we think that the person in the screen is the person talking talking, is a person talking to us, and we know that there's no one in the screen. But even if that's true, when we see a scene or we see an object of desire, do we develop desire? When we see an object of aversion, we can develop aversion. Yes. Or rather, even if we know that that is not the person, it appears as if it were, and we relate as if it were the person. So what happens is we live in a reality that, in more simplistic terms, it's mutually dependent, which is, we can call that interdependent. And there's a difference between interdependent and mutually dependent. Let me explain. Because when we say interdependent, the idea can come that you and I are independent. I exist here, you exist there, and we communicate. We are interdependent. We touch somewhere. I influence you, you influence me. We are interdependent. Are you following? And now think about a reality like two chairs. Put two chairs in front of you. We sit in one of the chairs. The chair that we're sitting on becomes this chair. And the other chair, what is it? It's that chair. And then we get up from this chair and we sit in that chair. And then that chair becomes this chair. This and that, they don't exist independently without the other, big and small. They don't exist independently from each other. So what happens is there's a difference when something doesn't exist independently from its relation. So and then it's another thing to say that thing relates to another thing. Is that difference clear? So when we say that we live in an interdependent reality, actually it's mutually dependent. That means that nothing exists independently from its relations, from the interactions that it has. And we, as observers, when we find ourselves in front of any reality, regardless of what it is, through this process of sensory object, a sense faculty, a sense consciousness, and the value that we attribute to this contact, we then give a name and we put these parts together. We say, this is like this. Or rather, what I see doesn't exist independently of myself. Let me explain in a way that might seem strange, but it really works. Like I hear the singing bowl. And once we hear the sound of the singing bowl, we're hearing it through what is called a sense, a hearing consciousness. We talked about the sense consciousness, which is the sound that's in contact with the sound, the sense faculty, and then it sends it to the sense, which is the hearing consciousness. It says, oh, there's a sound. So the sound that I hear and the sound that each one of you hear does not exist independently from my sense, my hearing consciousness that perceives the sound. The sound that I am hearing, in other words, it doesn't exist independently from me. The sound that you hear doesn't exist independently from you. it depends on causes and conditions, sure, but the sound that I hear doesn't exist independently from my hearing consciousness that perceives the sound of the singing bowl. That mind, that perception, that mental perception that perceives the sound of the singing bowl, that sound that I hear doesn't exist independently from the hearing consciousness that perceives the sound of the singing bowl. But looking on the other side, the hearing consciousness that hears the sound of the singing bowl, does that exist independently from the sound of the sound of the singing bowl? Can we generate can we generate the sound consciousness that hears the singing bowl without the vibrations of the singing bowl? So we can say that the sound consciousness doesn't exist without the sound of the singing bowl, but the sound of the singing bowl doesn't exist without the hearing consciousness that perceives that. This shows us that they are mutually dependent and neither one exists in an autonomous way. Sound doesn't exist as an entity by itself, and the sound and the faculty, the sense faculty and the sense consciousness that perceives it cannot exist without the this object itself. If you were to take away one or the other, they do not exist. They would not exist. Inner reality exists. External reality that we perceive exists, but external reality that I perceive does not exist without my inner reality, and my inner reality doesn't exist without this external reality. They are non-dual. The duality is where we see these things as separate things. Okay, maybe they connect, they communicate, but they're two separate things. So let's try again to get to this point to see that the image that I see exists, but it doesn't exist independently from the value that I attribute to it. It doesn't exist from my existently from my visual sense faculty or the visual consciousness, that contact that I have with the visual object, but the mind that perceives and that inferential cognition or the direct cognition, as in this case, that sees it, and the mind that perceives the object, it doesn't exist independently from the object itself, from the light that comes and touches and that whole process. So they are mutually dependent, and no matter how much we look, we will never find anything that exists autonomously, independently, or objectively. This is something that was explained. These teachings of Buddha's was explained extensively. There's a text called Tsawachera, which is the root of the middle way, where Nagarjuna analyzes every aspect of reality to see if it exists autonomously. At a certain point, he talks about the runner. Then let's take a runner as an example. How is a runner? What makes a runner a runner? What makes a runner a runner? He needs to run. So one who is stopped, is he a runner? No. So when I say the runner is running, can I say that? Normally we say, oh, we see someone who's running. We say, oh, look at that runner who's running. But But for the runner to run, he needs he needs to exist as a runner before he starts running. And when he's not running, he's not a runner. So what defines one or the other? They're mutually dependent. He's running because he's a runner, and he's a runner because he runs, and it's the same for everything. There's the action and the agent. The agent doesn't exist. It doesn't exist as an agent. The agent doesn't exist independently the action, but the action doesn't exist independently from the agent. They're mutually dependent. And that is like that for everything, even space and time. Nothing exists in an autonomous, independent way. Everything exists within a very complex net of relation. Now, someone might ask, what does any of this have to do with me? What does this have to do with the question of that Lama Tsongkhapa asked, the root of samsara? Even if observing and analyzing, and we see that it's like this, when we relate in our daily lives, in every moment, various situation, objects, etc., how does reality appear to us? As existing mutually dependent or independent, or something objective and solid, like it is like this. We live it in this way, don't we? So one example is I hear the sound. I'm hearing something objective. I'm not even aware of the object, of the value that I attribute to it, and I feel pleasure, and I want to repeat that feeling of pleasure, so I develop attachment. I hear a sound that I don't like, for example, this. I don't want to hear that again. What do you say? You say stop. No? And so you develop aversion. So first towards the sound, and then towards my finger, and then towards the person making the noise. So what happens, one of the effects of this is that we live a part of our reality, of our experience in a way where I see a sensory object as the cause of that sensation, when it's only just a part of it. And this way of seeing reality as if it were objective or distanced, autonomous, detached, then I see that object of aversion, an object of anger, as something independent from me. That object of desire, I see it as something independent from me. Let me give you another example. Lama Ganshin gave me this example. I've told this story also in the past. He told me this. He gave me this. He told me this story. Let's say, or gave me this example when we were in the car together driving from Milan to Albagnano, just outside the toll gate, where then you go down, then you come up. So now when you're in the car, you can think about this. So here I'm giving some more colors to his stories. And imagine you're in a store and you're going to buy a coat, and you see a coat that you really like. You say, it's beautiful, I really like it. I would like to have this jacket, but it's really expensive. But next week, actually, I need to go to this party. And I have pants, but I need a jacket. I don't want this jacket. I need this jacket. Also because at the party, there will be this person that I really want to impress. I want that person to develop some attraction to me. So I really need to impress this person. And so that need increases. And there I'm flirting with this jacket. Should I take it? Should I not? No, I need it. It's wonderful. And I'm imagining myself at the party and this person comes and sees me. So I imagine it all when I'm there with this jacket. And as I'm in the middle of this daydream, I see that actual person next to me. And that person says, "Oh, hey, it's strange to see you here. Okay. I'll see you next week at the party." Yes. And this person then looks at the jacket and says, "Oh, how horrible. Oh, you need really, bad taste and ignorance to to wear such a jacket. And look at the quality of the material. Oh, the person would be really, it's what a shame to spend money on such a jacket. I wouldn't even get close to someone wearing this jacket." And that person says, "Ciao, see you later." And we're left just us and the jacket. And so my question is, has the jacket changed or is it the same jacket? If we're really proud, we might think that you still want it, but actually, did someone come from the shop to change that jacket? What changed about the jacket? The value that we attribute to it. Because as were before, it was a tool to develop attraction towards us. Now it's a danger to impressing that person. So I don't want that jacket anymore. What's interesting is that what changes an object, because that object has actually changed from an object of attraction, it's become an object of aversion because the value that attributed to it has changed. So all objects of attraction and aversion do not exist as such in an autonomous, independent, objective way. All objects of attraction and aversion, of fear, of jealousy, jealousy, envy, gratitude, love, they exist as such exclusively in an interdependent way, but not in an autonomous way. If someone asks us something, "Can you give me that thing?" Somebody asks us for something. It could be an object of generosity. "Oh, okay. How wonderful that I can share this with you." Or it can be an object of miserliness. "No, I don't want to share." Or indifference. Someone acts in a certain way that we don't agree with. Could be an object of compassion. "I'm sorry that you do this and you generate suffering for yourself and others." Or an object of aversion. "Oh, I want to destroy you." What makes that situation an object of compassion or hatred or anger? Is it an intrinsic quality or of that object, or the value that we attribute to it? And what makes something an object of desire or indifference or in aversion? Are these intrinsic characteristics of that thing or the values that we give? The values that we give. So when we're in front of our own mental defilements, as long as that object appears as being independently, intrinsically like that, we can't eliminate that completely. Let me give you an example. This object, for example, what is it? Does anyone have a doubt that this is a bell? Me neither. This is a bell. But if I say, okay, from this moment on, this is not a bell, it's a cup. We're going to drink water in this cup. It works. It's a tantric cup. Because the bell represents wisdom. So it's the cup to drink the nectar of wisdom. And so I start using it as drinking water. And now in the Gompa we drink water only from this cup. So when we take this new cup that we use, how do we live it? As a cup or as a bell that is functioning as a cup? How do we live it? It's a bell that we're using as a cup. Because it's a bell. Or rather, the object appears to us as being intrinsically, objectively, autonomously as a bell. Even when I change its name, and you'll need a lot of time to really change, because it appears to me as appearing intrinsically as a bell. There's an enormous difference between using this object as a bell that is functioning as a cup or using a cup. Using this object as a bell that's functioning as a cup or using this object as a cup. So similarly, I can live a situation of aversion as an opportunity to practice patience. There can be a difficult situations and I say, okay, here I need to practice patience. I'm really try not to react, change my habits. So there's this object of anger and I live it. I live it as an opportunity for spiritual growth. That's possible. I can also use this bell as a cup, but there's an enormous difference between using an object of anger as a spiritual growth or just living that experience as long as I live it as intrinsically as an object of anger, then we need nothing for that anger to actually come out. So I have to force myself to see this bell as a cup because it's always existed as a bell. It's in an autonomous, intrinsic way. And so once I stop putting effort into seeing this as a cup, it's back to being a bell. And so what happens as long as our emotions, in our emotions, we see the object that we're relating to in an independent, intrinsic way, we see it that way, then that object has a very solid basis to exist like that. But once we take away that basis, those emotions don't have any foundation. In other words, I can put a lot of effort into diminishing my anger, but as long as the objects of anger are objects of anger that exist intrinsically and objectively, as soon as I stop putting effort into not identifying with it as such, it'll just come back. So when instead, if I see that what I have in front of me does not exist independently as it appears, and if I'm able to deconstruct it, so when I can deconstruct it, at that point, that emotion doesn't have a solid basis, doesn't have a leg to stand on, let's say. The root of our suffering, of our obsession, of self-gratification and selfishness is this because we exist, in our opinion, in an independent, objective, intrinsic way as we appear, and everything that we see exists in that same autonomous, intrinsic way. This is our ignorance, this detachment from not seeing the nature of things as being mutually dependent and not seeing the non-duality between object of perception and perceiver, not seeing the non-duality. I mean, they're not, the object of perception and the perceiver are not one thing, but they are mutually dependent. Not seeing that generates selfishness and then anger and aversion and all the rest. And this is the key that we talked about before. Okay, now let's give a warm welcome to the children from the winter camp who have just arrived.
Nel frattempo riflettete su quello che abbiamo detto.
In the meantime, reflect on what we just said. I hope that you had enough time to reflect and have realized something. It is maybe even realizing that you haven't understood. But now, let's go back quickly to the question. We we still have a few minutes, and we can do so much in a short time. So let's go back to this new translation. The question that Lama Tsongkhapa asked. Number 4. So in the fourth question, Lama Tsongkhapa asks, when we examine our mind, we need to, he says, so when we examine our mind, we must develop a vivid experience based on valid reasons, not just on assumptions or beliefs. And that makes us recognize this is the primary and definitive cause that makes me be reborn in samsara. This is the definitive cause of samsara. So please come in or go out. Okay. So when we watch a movie, we see a scene, images, and we have a reaction, the cause of our suffering in that case, what is it? Is it the movie itself? The images that come to us? Is it the value that we attribute to it? Actually, the cause of suffering, of our reaction of that moment, is because there's an appearance. Those images appear as if they were real, and we suffer because we grasp at that appearance as if it were real. If I look in the mirror and I see a blackhead on my face, I said, what's that? But maybe someone actually made that black dot on the mirror itself. So the image appears as being my face, and I react as if that appearance is reality, is real. Our suffering comes from ignorance. Avidya. Avidya means to not see. There are two types of ignorance, to not see and to see erroneously. Now we're talking about seeing erroneously. We grasp to reality in an incoherent way. It's like being sure and relating to the earth as if it were flat. The appearance of the world as being flat is inevitable because that's how our senses are made, and the relationship that we have with distances. If we lived on a small planet like the Little Prince, we would see our planet as being a sphere, being round. But as the light reflects, comes to our senses, and this relationship of the measurement between us and our planet, we see it as being flat. The problem is not that we we relate to the planet as being. The problem is not that we see the planet as being flat. The problem is that we relate to the planet as being flat. So reality inevitably, until we become a Buddha, and this is the difference between a Buddha and an ordinary being, reality will continue to appear to us as being autonomous, independently objective, because in our natural way of perceiving things, we're not able to perceive those subtleties. We're not able to perceive the fact that on a very deep level, nothing exists independently. Nothing exists independently nothing exists as it seems. And the appearance is not the problem. The problem is that we grasp to that appearance as being real, and consequently we react with attraction or aversion. That is an object of anger in an autonomous, independent way, and I live it as such. I generate aversion. That's an object of attraction, and I see it as such, independently of me, and I live it accordingly. Going back to the mirror, the fact that that image appears to us as being our face is not the problem. The problem is that we grasp to that image as if it were real, and we relate to that as if it were real. So we need to divide it up into two parts. There's appearance, and then there's grasping to appearance. One thing is that the earth seems flat, and the other thing is that I believe it. One thing is that the image in the mirror looks like my face, and appears to be my face, and the other thing is my certainty that it is my face. Let's remember that the cause of samsara is, the question is, what is the cause of samsara in a general way? Because the cause of samsara is not the concept of intrinsic existence. The cause of samsara is the grasping at the appearance of intrinsic existence as if it were real. But this grasping to the appearance of intrinsic existence, but not in a general way, the one that's inside of us. So where do we need to point the finger? Here it says, as if we needed to find a thing. Is it a monk? Is it a man? Is he tall? Is he short? It was a person. It was a monk. He was young. We can give all the details, but until we actually point the finger at an individual, at a person, and say, it was you, we don't have the thief. So the cause of suffering is the grasping at intrinsic existence, is the grasping at existence, reality, as if it were independent, autonomous. But which reality? No, the one that happens within me. It's our grasping at intrinsic existence that we need to point the finger at. Are you following? Shall I repeat it? We shouldn't point the finger at the intrinsic existence, generally speaking, and not even just intrinsic existence, because it doesn't even exist. I mean, you can't point the finger at what doesn't exist. The cause of our suffering exists, and it's not intrinsic existence. It's the fact that we relate to reality as if it existed in an independent, objective, autonomous way, intrinsic way. And it's not the generalized concept of suffering. It's our own attitude of grasping at intrinsic existence. So we need, in this case, to allow ourselves to be able to observe in a non-conceptual way, see this appearance of intrinsic existence and the grasping as such. Before we resolving how to eliminate this grasping, we need this fundamental point. We need to see it. We need to be able to point our finger and say, this is the cause of samsara. This is the root. A little bit like a sickness, and I highlight, okay, what's the virus that created this illness? And then how do I get rid of this virus is another story. But first of all, I need to identify it. This is the virus. Let's read quickly the answer. Did we read the answer? Yes. The root of samsara is in the mental continuum of all embodied beings. The two innate forms of self-attachment. The two innate forms makes reference to grasping at intrinsic existence of phenomenon and grasping at inter-existence of self, oneself, which fixating on the I and the mind grasp. The I and the mind was what I perceive. Everything appears as being grasp at them as existing intrinsically, not as mere conceptual designations. We don't understand that what appears to us depends on the value that we attribute to it. This is afflicted ignorance. This is our mental defilement called ignorance. And in the text that says the mother of the victorious ones, the mother of all the Buddhas, which is wisdom that it allows for all the Buddhas to arise. For attachment to the I and the mind, beings wander in samsara. Attachment is this grasping at the I and the mind as if they existed autonomously, objectively, as they appear. And he continues, and in the 70 verses on emptiness, the Buddha called ignorance the conceiving as truly existent things arisen from causes and conditions. From this arise the 12 links. And here comes the next question, which is, what are the 12 links of interdependence? At the basis, the phenomenon appear as if they are autonomous and independent, but we don't just stay with this grasping. We act. And then here come the 12 links of dependent arising, which is very, very clearly explained how samsara works. All of our mental defilements, all of this comes from this grasping at intrinsic existence. And it's important for us at least to try to start seeing it even from far away. And to conclude, I just want to touch on the path to realize it. It's made of 3 plus 1, 3 parts plus with a result. The first step is called the wisdom of listening. The wisdom of listening in relation to to emptiness, the lack of inherent existence, because emptiness is the lack of intrinsic existence. I mean, as it appears. So that first level is when, after having listened and read, we have a correct assumption. We are sure that reality doesn't exist intrinsically as it appears. We haven't had a direct experience. We don't understand it completely, but we're convinced. We're convinced that it's like this. At this point, I can go to the next phase to develop the wisdom of understanding. The wisdom of understanding, I go through a process of analysis. I look at on all sides. I need to debate in every way, try to analyze until I have no doubt whatsoever that reality is interdependent and cannot, therefore, exist in an intrinsic way as it appears. It is clear to me. It's clear based on perception and conceptually. At that point, we've developed the wisdom of understanding emptiness. Once there, we go to the third level, which is developing the wisdom of meditation. The wisdom of meditation on emptiness. I need to induce that inner state that perceives that perception is false. It sees and recognizes it sees that intrinsic existence and can deconstruct it because it knows it's not like that, and then remains in that state, this intrinsic existence does not exist, and when one remains in that meditative state, single pointedly, without agitation or mental torpor, one has concluded the wisdom of meditation. After a long, long, long time meditating, one then arrives to a point where this experience of the lack of intrinsic existence, that false appearance that doesn't exist as it appears, as being autonomous or intrinsic, is no longer conceptual, but it's experiential. It's something that goes beyond the concept, and one is able to feel it. And this non-conceptual direct, a non-conceptual experience, is a direct experience, is called the realization of emptiness. Sometimes people say, I think I had a moment of realization of emptiness. It's very easy to understand if you have had this direct realization of emptiness. Once you've had really, truly a direct experience of emptiness, then there is no solid basis for any mental defilement to be sustained. So if you still have any of those feelings, like any negative feelings of anger or jealousy, whatever, then you have not realized directly emptiness. But just in a few minutes, we have been able to get to, even conceptually, to imagine this path that takes us out of samsara. It's possible. It means that we need to change our paradigm. It means that we live a reality. We live reality with the awareness of its complex interdependence, and this naturally takes us out of selfishness, anger, jealousy, envy, and fear, and all the rest. And that's why this emptiness is so important. We talk so much about emptiness, and maybe at some point you don't even understand what we're talking about. But emptiness is nothing other than the lack of real, solid existence that appears to us as being real, which doesn't mean that reality doesn't exist. Reality exists, but it's not. But it's not. But it doesn't exist autonomously as it appears. So the fact that if I see the world as flat doesn't make it flat, and it doesn't. If I say that the planet is not a flat planet doesn't exist, it doesn't mean that the planet doesn't exist. It doesn't exist as it appears. It appears in an interdependent way, mutually. Reality exists in a mutually dependent way, but not in a objective, solid way as it appears to us. So let's allow ourselves to reflect. The key to reflect on this is not about thinking of the void, the emptiness. It's not about thinking about the lack, but we should focus on seeing clearly interdependence and seeing how things actually are, that everything exists in this very complex network of relation, this relation among parts, the relation between the objects, the relation between causes and conditions and result, the relation that exists between the object of perception and perceiver. It's a very complex network, and it's only within that everything exists. If we try to identify, highlight anything in an independent way, independent from its relationships, we will never, ever find it. Everything exists exclusively within this network of relation. and it's difficult. Does this mean I don't exist? No, I, as an independent, autonomous being, do not exist. But a being that depends on all the relationships exists. So I don't exist independently from you. I don't exist independently from everything that determines, who I am, my being. So I invite you to reflect on this interdependence of everything, and it's very important to give a lot of space, take a lot of time to really see ignorance. We need to allow ourselves to see clearly the appearance of intrinsic existence and our grasping at this intrinsic existence, and see it on every level, because the appearance of intrinsic existence and the grasping at the appearance of intrinsic existence does not exist only on a sensory level or conceptual level. We need to be able to recognize it and apply the antidote. But first, and there's no hurry, first we need to apply the correct diagnosis, and it's not something generalized. It's like saying, I have a sickness caused by a virus. I don't need to highlight and say, oh, I have that virus. No, I have to look at my virus. How can I get rid of my virus, not virus generally speaking? Is that clear? Otherwise, I can spend my life looking to get rid of the viruses in general, but or debating and philosophizing and phenomenon lack intrinsic existence and in all different wonderful ways, but without ever looking at myself in the eyes and saying, "Oh, there you are. It's inside of me." This is what we need to do, because the object to negate is not something general. It's our grasping at intrinsic existence. Our grasping at the appearance of intrinsic existence. For tomorrow, I invite you to take a small book, and there's so much inside. It's the book on the 12 links of interdependence, because the next question is about how the 12 links of how do the 12 links of dependent arising work, and without this visual support, it'll be difficult to follow. So it's a simple way, but we need this as a basis to understand. So please pick that up in the shop.
Drove munsel takto ne gyur chi kewa kunto yanda lama dang dralme cheke pela long chin sada lamge yunde rabzone dorje change kopa nyur toba sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delek shin ninsen takto delek pe kuncho sumki chingelo Kuncho sumke ngodrubut sol, kuncho sumke trashisho.
At dawn or at dusk, at night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to obtain all realizations and sprinkle the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness.
Night or midday, may the three jewels grant us their blessings. May they help us to achieve all realizations and sprinkle all the path of our lives with various signs of auspiciousness. Buon appetito.
Have a good lunch. I just like to say today at 2:15, I need to I have an activity to do with the children. So if you're not going to be here tomorrow and you'd like to say hello, that's fine. Otherwise, I ask you please to wait until tomorrow.